In late August 1968, arguably the biggest Beatles song in their extensive catalog of hits was released, famously titled Hey Jude. And if asked, a majority of Beatles fans will tell you this monumental classic was written about John Lennon's son, Julian. In fact, Paul McCartney, the man who wrote it, may also lead you to believe that. The key word here being lead. However, die-hard Beatles fans will tell you no. Hey Jude was actually written about John Lennon. In fact, John himself publicly said that was the case. Well, the truth is, both of these interpretations are patently incorrect. Hey Jude is about someone else entirely, and today, through dissecting both the lyrics to the song and the history surrounding the time they were written, we're going to reveal who Jude really is. But first, let's officially rule out who it isn't. In his two-book box set titled The Lyrics, Paul writes, "The song started when I was traveling out one day to see Julian and his mother Cynthia. At this point, John had left Cynthia. I was thinking about how tough it would be for Jules, as I called him, to have his dad leave him, to have his parents go through a divorce. It started out as a song of encouragement. What happens next is I start adding elements. When I write, 'You were made to go out and get her,' there's now another character. So it might now be a song about a breakup or some romantic mishap. By this stage, it's moved on from being about Julian." Later, Paul adds, "Hey Jude started off as my being worried for Julian, and it morphed into this moment of celebration." So that dismisses Julian as being Jude. He was the initial inspiration, but not the end product. And of course, how could the whole song be about Julian? As Paul pointed out, lines such as, "You have found her, now go and get her," and "You're waiting for someone to perform with," make no sense to Julian's situation at the time. However, they could be interpreted to fit John's situation. After all, John had just got together with Yoko Ono around the time Hey Jude was written. John certainly thought this was the case. He thought that even though Paul was so cold towards Yoko, and acting as if she were stealing his best friend and musical partner away from him, Hey Jude was Paul's way of saying it was all okay, a way of giving John and Yoko his blessing. In a 1980 interview with Rolling Stone, he stated as much, saying, "I always heard it as a song to me. If you think about it, Yoko's just come into the picture. Paul's saying, 'Hey Jude, hey John, go out and get her.' Subconsciously he was saying, 'Go ahead, leave me.' On a conscious level, he didn't want me to go ahead. The angel in him was saying, 'Bless you.'" But let's just hold on a minute here. When one steps back and actually thinks about it, the line, "Go out and get her," doesn't really apply to John either. He didn't need to go out and get Yoko. He had already done that in late May of that year, when Cynthia came home and Yoko was there in her house wearing her bathrobe. John told Cynthia right then and there that their marriage was over because he was now with Yoko, and he meant it. This was well prior to Hey Jude even being thought of, obviously, because it was thought up for the first time as Paul went to see Julian in consolation for that very episode, after John and Yoko were already official. Moreover, John didn't need to let Yoko into his heart, as the song also states, because he had already done that as well. By the time Paul began writing Hey Jude, Yoko was already an appendage of John's. She was at the studio, at home, and everywhere in between with him, including the toilet. They were already recording music, if you want to call it that, or performing together, as the song says by then. He had publicly announced his love for Yoko and had let her into every single facet of his life, not least of which, his heart. No, this song was written to someone who hadn't yet fully let a woman into their heart, but thought that they needed to, as the song says, make it better. And Beatles history shows there was someone in a confused state at that time. Someone who was experiencing a romantic mishap, who was in the middle of a breakup, who was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders, and who was yet to go out and get her to make it better. After Paul played Hey Jude for the first time on his piano for John, John turned to him and said, "Ah, it's me." To which Paul said, "No, it's me." And this is what makes the most sense. Just around the end of May or beginning of June of 1968, Paul was engaged to Jane Asher, the girl he'd been with for 5 years. The problem was, Paul wasn't in love with Jane, at least not in the way one should be when committing themselves to a person for the rest of their life. In the book Many Years From Now, Paul says it plainly. I realized that she and I weren't really going to be the thing we'd always thought we might be. Once or twice we talked about getting married, and plans were afoot, but I don't know. Something really made me nervous about the whole thing. It just never settled with me. And that's very important for me. Things must feel comfortable for me. There's something very special about that feeling. I hadn't quite managed to be able to get it with Jane. As a result of these feelings, or lack thereof, Paul had been with several other women during his relationship with Jane. Most notably, he'd met Linda Eastman in the summer of 1967 in London and was interested in her right away. By May of the next year, 1968, him and John had gone to New York, where Linda lived, to promote their new company, Apple Corps, and, though still engaged to Jane, he spent a passionate night with Linda before heading back home to England. By July, Jane had found out about a few of Paul's affairs, even catching him in the act once. As a result, the engagement was off, and after 5 years together, they were officially through. And it was within that exact time frame, within those events, that Hey Jude was fully written and recorded, and a read-through of the lyrics with all that in mind shows whose circumstances the lyrics best fit. It is a song by Paul, for Paul, just as he'd told John right after he showed it to him. Jude is Paul. The song was written as a sort of pep talk, words of encouragement for someone carrying pain and guilt on their shoulders after a messy breakup, but seeing a bright day ahead, so long as they followed their heart towards the woman they'd truly fallen in love with, the one who would make it better, Linda. Hey Jude, don't make it bad. Take a sad song and make it better. These opening lines were thought up for Julian, but wound up fitting Paul's situation exactly. The sad song, of course, is his breakup with Jane, and leaving Julian's story behind, he carries on by telling himself how he can remedy this sadness. Remember to let her into your heart, her being Linda. Then you can start to make it better. Hey Jude, don't be afraid. You were made to go out and get her. The minute you let her under your skin, then you begin to make it better. By saying let her under your skin, Paul is illustrating that out of all the women he'd been to up to that point, including Jane, he'd never let them pass the surface level. He wants to let Linda in under the skin, past the surface, inside, and into his heart. And anytime you feel the pain, he continues on, hey Jude, refrain. Don't carry the world upon your shoulders. Carrying the world on one's shoulders are words used by someone expressing the burden of a guilty conscience. Paul had cheated on Jane. He had ruined their engagement, and he had broken her heart. Although he never felt it would work in the end with her, he was still an empathic human. He spent 5 years with her and her family, and he still would have greatly cared about her feelings, and no doubt would have been feeling the pain of those circumstances himself. For well you know that it's a fool, he continues, who plays it cool by making his world a little colder. We'd be remiss to ignore the clever play on words here. Playing it cool, of course, means to act like nothing's bothering you. But Paul calls this a fool's errand, as playing it cool in this situation would be certain to make life cold and bitter. The cleverness, of course, being the multiple meanings of the word cool, used here to indicate both calm indifference and low temperature all at once, an astute lyrical technique worth mentioning. Anyhow, the encouragement to pursue Linda then carries on. Hey Jude, don't let me down. You have found her. Now go and get her. Remember to let her into your heart. Then you can start to make it better. However, before pursuing her, Paul wisely counsels himself to first deal with the pent-up emotions of his present situation, advising that in order to let new feelings enter, he must first face and release the pain and guilt currently inside. the wise philosophy of out with the old, in with the new, as he writes. So let it out and let it in. Hey Jude, begin. Now, the next lines, "You're waiting for someone to perform with," seem to be a response to how Paul was feeling about losing John to Yoko. After all, John was suddenly bringing in music, if you want to call Revolution No. 9 music, that he'd recorded with Yoko, and demanding it be on the album. Yoko was suddenly in the studio at all times, giving her opinion and input on all of John's songs. She was tied to his hip, in effect replacing Paul as his partner in the creative process. In this line, "You're waiting for someone to perform with," Paul seems to be coming to terms with the fact that the writing was already on the wall. He'd lost John, and now he wanted his own replacement, someone new that he could perform with. And this line of thought feeds perfectly into the next line where Paul writes, "And don't you know that it's just you?" As in, he's all alone now. But he reassures himself by saying, "Hey Jude, you'll do. The movement you need is on your shoulder." That is, listen to what your conscience is telling you. Heed your intuition. Pay attention to the angel on your shoulder and move to where it's guiding you. Then you'll begin to make it better. And this is exactly what Paul did. Just over a month after his breakup with Jane, Paul's sad song, he would take initiative and bring Linda out to England. Or in a manner of speaking, he would go out and get the girl he had found in order to make it better. Once there, Paul would let her deep into his heart, marrying her mere months later. And a few months after that, the Beatles would come to an end, and Paul would never work with John again. But he did work with Linda for the next decade straight, and every now and then for years beyond. And other than some extenuating circumstances in Japan in the 70s, a story for another day, the two of them spent literally every night of their 30-year marriage together, making Hey Jude not only a work of melodic genius, but more amazingly, a self-fulfilling prophecy, a dream come true. So there's another clue for you all. Hey Jude was Paul.